He was Wild Bill Wellman. And he was wild because he was wild. He was from a wild era of filmmaking.
He took no guff. He gave better than he got. He was a very strong personality.
He got what he wanted. He just said, "That's it!" He'd clap his hands or he'd jump up and down and really get excited.
All right, now listen. See, the plane's on fire. They were having it. 48, it's going to be like that. I couldn't understand what the hell he was saying. How many says on? All right, then, do it now.
But, geez, he bumped into me and he said, "What the hell are you doing, kid? For God's sake, give me the goddamn..." And I turned around and said, "You son of a bitch. Fuck you!"
He was not afraid to tell you what he thought. If he didn't like the way it was going, you knew it right now. There was no subtlety in Bill.
He was clearly somebody that was going to go mine life for some of its deeper treasures, and he would bring it to his work, which he did.
He could be very intimidating, but underneath that, he was a pussycat.
No sentimentality. You're a two-fisted guy, you're a two-gun guy, you're out front with everything. But I saw him when he was sentimental.
He was a man of tremendous intuitive talent, deep loyalties, and strong convictions. He was also arrogant, with an explosive temper and a life-size distaste for authority. And yet, William Wellman would have a history as a team player, whether it be on the ice as a brawling hockey player, in the air over France as a decorated fighter pilot, or in Hollywood as a contract studio director. In his lifetime, he would direct more than 76 motion pictures. He was known for his definitive decision-making, blazing speed, and unpredictable temper. He was often considered by peers like Victor Fleming, Frank Capra, John Ford, and others to be the best among them. And yet, while some of his pictures are remembered individually, his body of work as a whole has been largely forgotten. But upon re-examination, his pictures stand out as technically innovative, infused with a personal energy that was unique to who he was as a man. In a way, he was the character man of directors, rarely landing the glamour roles, but nearly always winning the most interesting.
He wasn't called Wild Bill for nothing. He used pretty salty language. And when he would blow and things weren't going right, he blew pretty good. So shooting next door was Loretta Young. And Loretta Young was going through a stage at that time of being very religious, I guess you'd call it. And she had a habit of, when she was around you, if you used cuss words, depending on how bad the words were, she would charge you a quarter or 50 cents or $1 or $1.50 was big money for a very bad word. And she'd collect that money and give it to a charity. And so every time she'd walk on the set, everybody'd say, uh-oh, you know, here comes Loretta Young, watch yourselves. Well, this one particular day, Bill was having a bad day. He was, nothing was going right, and he was ranting and raving, and he was chewing actors out, and he was going crazy, and a door opened, and he was talking and glanced over, and here came Loretta Young, and without breaking stride, he walked over to her, took out $20. He said, there's $20, that ought to cover the next 5 minutes. Now, let me tell you guys, and he went on. Bliss to this guy, she took off like she was shot out of a cannon, but she had $20 for her charity. But that was Bill. He didn't, his timing was perfect.
On February 29th, 1896, leap year, William Augustus Wellman was born at Linden Place in Brookline, Massachusetts, in the four-poster bed of his mother. In that year, America was celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Statue of Liberty. And Buffalo Bill Cody was storming the continent at the height of his Barnum-esque career. The year of his birth would also boast America's first public screening of a motion picture. And only one decade later, the Wright Flyer would take to the sky in man's first powered flight. These two events, and the World War that followed, would shape and direct Wellman's destiny as both an aviator and a filmmaker.
What does the A stand for, Bill?
It stands for Augustus. My dad gave me that name because he wanted me to learn how to fight.
He tried to make the choir,
Yeah.
but the minister told him that he would have to be a very good boy before he could make it.
Yeah.
And it took him a long time, and there was scrape after scrape after scrape before he got in.
Well,
you remember, darling?
How long? The biggest ham I've ever seen in my life.
How long did it
Wonderful.
take Bill to get in the choir at that rate?
1 whole year.
Oh, my.
He was a juvenile delinquent, really, and just stealing cars and throwing stink bombs at the high school principal, and he would have to repeatedly report to a kind of an academic probation officer, who coincidentally was his own mother.
High school provided more constructive venues for Wellman's energies, and ice hockey was the perfect place for his brawling lifestyle. Afraid of nothing, he made a name for himself at a local rink, crashing both the boards and the competition. His roughneck play caught the eye of visiting Hollywood film star Douglas Fairbanks. The impression he made that day would later change the course of his life. One Sunday afternoon, Wellman and some of his friends stood at the edge of a sod-covered airstrip near Woburn, Massachusetts, watching Spads and Jennies take off and land. Wellman was bitten with the bug to fly. Like most young men of the time, Wellman viewed the coming war as a patriotic opportunity to show courage, valor, and other romantic virtues. It would also be an opportunity to learn to fly. Washed away by propaganda, politics, and a new sense of patriotism, sentiments of the horrors of war were lost on the young. And so, across America, dance halls and gymnasiums fell silent. In that war, 10 million would perish on the battlefield alone. Another 20 million would die of starvation and disease. And no one who returned would ever be the same. Wellman worked his way into the Lafayette Escadrille, an elite French squadron composed exclusively of American flyers. Once in the Corps, anticipation was the new recruit's biggest enemy. Only when another pilot was killed did an actual flying position open up. Wellman's opportunity came soon enough, and he made the most of it.
Well, a lot of people think he got the nickname Wild Bill in Hollywood. but actually he got it in France. The French gave it to him because he volunteered to be a one-man dawn patrol, taking off, flying low, hedge hopping all the way to the enemy airfields to surprise them. Then he would bomb, strafe, and be out of there before they knew what hit him. Dad had 2 confirmed kills, which I always thought was kind of a joke, because to get a confirmed kill, you had to land your plane, pull off the decal, the cross on a German plane, and then get back up and bring that back to get a confirmed kill. So, you know, I'm sure he and all those flyers got more kills than they were given credit for.
Though he didn't see them much after the war, Wellman would speak of his 2 best friends, pilots Tommy Hitchcock and Duke Sinclair, for decades. In a career that was yet ahead of him, these men would appear as archetypes again and again, as Wellman would try to unravel, understand, and explain what it meant to fight in a war, to be bound by isolation, danger, and the privilege of sacrifice.
He got shot down by anti-aircraft fire. And he said, I was the only flyer ever to get shot down because they couldn't hit anything. But they hit me. He broke his back in 2 places. The control stick went up on the roof of his mouth. He had a silver plate put in his head.
A lot of his body was wired together. He told me one day he had to crawl into the shower to put hot and cold water on his body so he could move. And he had very bad arthritis in later years. So he had a lot of problems. That a lot of it went back to the war.
After recovering from his injuries, Wellman was assigned to Rockwell Field in San Diego as a flight instructor. His next brush with Hollywood would be in one of his 4 unsuccessful marriages. Helene Chadwick was a rising film star, and while the idea of being married to a war hero had its appeal, the magic soon faded, and Wellman caught his bride in the arms of her leading man. His brief marriage over and time in the service coming to an end, Wellman decided to look up Douglas Fairbanks. Acting on a tip that a Hollywood gathering was in progress at famous Pick Fair, the estate Fairbanks shared with Mary Pickford, Wellman carefully planned his legendary attack. Dressed and decorated in his uniform, he flew his Spad from San Diego and landed on the polo field in front of Fairbanks and his astounded guests.
Here comes this war hero with a very theatrical limp and a steel plate in his head, which apparently was making him a little screwy, and, you know, covered with medals, and, you know, what kind of sight must this guy have created? He went to Fairbanks and reintroduced himself, and Fairbanks remembered him, and Fairbanks immediately offered him a part in a picture. It was called The Knickerbocker Buckaroo, and it was a Western, and it was a fairly substantial role for somebody who had never had any experience in acting at all.
He saw himself on the screen, and he went in the men's room, and he threw up. Now, he used to tell that story all the time, so I really believe it. I think it's true.
He went to Fairbanks and said, you know, thanks for the help, but I really don't feel like being an actor. I don't think I'm good at it. And Fairbanks said, well, I'll be glad to help you however I can. What would you like to be? Wellman pointed to the director, who was Albert Parker, and said, how much does he make? And Fairbanks told him, and Wellman said, I want to be a director.
Wellman went from making $400 a week as an actor to $20 a week as a mailboy at Goldwyn Studios. Among his daily duties was the humbling task of delivering fan mail to none other than his ex-wife, Helene Chadwick. Such pedestrian duties drove him to seize an unusual opportunity. When General Blackjack Pershing visited the studio, Goldwyn required all the veterans to appear in uniform. Pershing picked Wellman out of the lineup and asked him if they had ever met before. Wellman thought back to a brothel in Paris and replied, General, I had better not say right here. Pershing remembered immediately and asked Wellman what he could do to help him.
Dad said, well, you can take me over behind that tree and talk to me for a while, make me seem important. And that's what he did. And the next day, Goldwyn asked Dad into his office and made him an assistant director. Said, "You're the kind of man I want at my studio."
He worked very often as an assistant with a director named Bernard Durning, who he thought the world of, who was a real two-fisted kind of hard-drinking director of action pictures. And I think Durning, even though he couldn't have been much older than Wellman, took him under his wing and was teaching him the ropes. During a making of a picture called The 11th Hour, Durning went on a binge and just got completely soused, couldn't do anything. He called Wellman in and he said, "Now's the time. I need you to shoot this footage because I'm incapable of doing it." And so for a couple of weeks, Wellman shot that film. The studio heads, when they saw it, they were very impressed, and they went to Durning and they said, "The last couple of weeks has been the best stuff you've shot in this picture. This is great." And Durning, who could have taken the credit himself, turned to him and said, "I didn't do that. Wellman did it. You ought to make him a director."
Wellman cut his teeth in silent films and made 11 pictures between 1923 and 26. 6 were Buck Jones features, though virtually none of this early work has survived, the nitrate prints long since disintegrated. But the reels that do remain hint at a style and energy that Wellman would later become famous for.
We were shooting a scene on the back lot, a night scene, rain coming down, and they're walking down the New York street. And we set it up with the big brood arcs and all of that. And just as we're ready to go, I noticed a diamond, a glare, bouncing off of one window. And I calculated how long it would take to realign the brutes. And so I went over the hammer and I broke the window. And we shot it. And the next day, as we come to shoot, it was a night shoot before it, there's a guy from the front office at Warner's down there just ripping me out. They're taking me out of my pay, et cetera, et cetera. And Bill came over, Wellman came over and said, "What's going on here?" And the guy tells him, and without a word, Bill picks up a hammer and goes down and breaks every window on that set. On one side, come down the other side. He says, "If you ever come down and interfere with my crew again, I'm going to burn down Jack Warner's office."
In 1926, the American movie-going public was proving at the box office that films about the big war were of enormous interest. To bring to the screen the story of the first war fought in the air, B.P. Schulberg felt that Wellman was the only director qualified because of his actual flying and fighting experience. Paramount agreed and decided to take a huge gamble with the young director, giving him the helm of one of the most complicated and expensive motion pictures of all time. The epic would be called Wings and would cost an extraordinary $2 million. Superstar Clara Bow, the It Girl, was cast for her marquee value as the unrequited girl next door. In the leading male roles, Wellman cast unknowns Dick Arlen and Charles Buddy Rogers. And in a cameo appearance, a yet undiscovered legend in the making, Gary Cooper.
Gary Cooper and Richard Arlen and I were all pals. But Gary Cooper didn't stay long with us. He just had one scene in Wings. But boy, that one scene was so great, he did it so magnificently that he just took that whole picture away from all of us.
His fan mail increased by, I think, 1,000-fold or something within weeks of the film's premiere. And it really got him started.
Wellman insisted that the actors learn how to fly. The safety pilot would duck down, and then the actor became, as Buddy Rogers remembered, the photographer, director, actor, and pilot, everything for 500 feet. In order to give the aircraft a sense of speed, Wellman insisted on shooting the aerial sequences against a background of clouds, and he kept 16 camera operators on the payroll for a month while he waited for the right kind of weather. Executives at Paramount, however, didn't understand this obsession for reality, nor did they appreciate the insolence with which he practiced politics. But the studio was so heavily invested that Wellman had them over a creative barrel and eventually got the shots he wanted. His arrogance, however, had caused deep resentments that would not soon be forgotten.
When I first started Top Gun, I said there's a master shot that I've got to get, which is the master shot in Wings, which is the major dogfight in the beginning of the movie in Wings. And I think they had eight aircraft all in the air, and they all felt like they were within touching distance of each other, and they're all twisting and swirling and ducking and diving.
When the clouds finally arrived, Wellman choreographed some of the most spectacular aerial footage ever to be seen in motion picture history.
I was amazed at what they did in 1928, you know, because of the lack of technology. But in the end, I sort of flashed back to Top Gun and what we did in 1985, whenever it was almost equal. It almost equaled itself out because we had the state of the art in terms of technology, and we got, you know, more different stuff to what they got then. But what they got then with the very simplistic cameras and equipment was brilliant.
The amazing staging. We're talking about masterful staging, like the Spielberg staging of today, or Francis Coppola of Apocalypse Now. You have it right there in Wings. You know, you have it there. And it still holds up. But to the point where you say, how the hell did they do it?
There's a scene in Wings where Buddy Rogers comes upon Arlen's body in the French farmhouse. There's this very tearful, very emotional scene between them, during which Buddy actually kisses Richard Arlen on the lips. It's a scene of such pure emotion, of such unself-conscious sadness and affection that you really don't see anything else like that in films then or now. I mean, it's a very rare moment of just pure love between men.
There's a bond that develops between men that I think was understood beautifully by these guys who were there. And who would understand better than Bill Wellman, who clearly was seeking some adventure in his life. I suspect whether it was flying for the Lafayette or he would have found it somewhere, whether it was that, it would have been something.
He could not be untrue to what he knew. And I don't think he ever had an experience in Hollywood that compared in terms of meaning to him that the war, that what happened in the war. I think that dominated his life in a way. He talked about it all the time, and this was a lot of years later. And I think he had to be true to that. He had been through something that a lot of men hadn't been through, and been hurt, you know, and survived. And I think he had to be true to that. He was a very honest man.
Not knowing what they had, executives at Paramount were prepared to write the whole Wings misadventure off as a costly mistake. And antipathy toward Wellman was so strong that he wasn't even invited to the opening of his own film. But people came in droves, and the studio found itself with a blockbuster on its hands. While the success of the film was undeniable, the studio still managed not to invite Wellman to the first Academy Awards presentation, for which Wings won the first Oscar ever given for Best Picture.